Hello, in this video we're going to look at port forwarding through firewalls. So at the moment we have in our head office a NAT firewall on the ADSL modem. We've got two VPN tunnels going to the branch offices, and simulating the internet we've got a 10.0.10.0 subnet on switch 1, which then plugs into this router here, which is called the internet, and goes out to the actual internet. And then we've got a switch 2, 10.0.2.0/24 subnet, in which we've got all the branch offices currently connected. So what we want is for somebody from the public, so anybody out here on the internet, either attached to switch 1 or switch 2, which represents anybody basically out there on the internet, being able to go through the head office firewall and get to our web server, which is on 192.168.0.66, and it's a /26 subnet. And internally we can get to this via DNS and via our VPN tunnels and all that sort of stuff. We can get to it, and I'll quickly demonstrate that we can access our web server internally, but I want to be able to access it externally, so this website is going to be available to the general public. So to that end, what I've done is I've plugged in a Windows 10 machine into switch 2. Okay, so it's out there in the public, in the internet, but it's not in the same subnet as the head office ADSL, or NBN router. Okay, so it's not in the 10.0.10, it's actually in the 10.0.2 subnet, so it's the same as the branch offices. Goes across the internet to get to the head office. Okay, so let's have a quick look. Okay, so I've got this Windows 10 machine. It's not in the domain or anything like that. Let's log into that, and we'll run up a command prompt and an IP config/all, and you'll see that it's a 10.0.2.2 with a 2.1 gateway and a DNS server that goes out to Google's DNS server. So this thing will get out to the internet without too many problems, and we can prove that. Okay, so images, iSetter. Okay, so it gets pictures out there on the internet, no problems. So that's our Windows 10 machine that's plugged into this switch 2. So we can see that it's got a gateway of 10.0.2.1, which we can see is this interface here, and it's plugged into this 10.0.2 switch. So it's plugged into switch 2, and we can quickly have a look at devices, network, and we can see that it's actually plugged into switch 2, an internal network. Okay, so that's how this thing's set up. It's plugged directly into this switch here. That's its gateway. It gets out to the internet. It's working the same as anybody out there in the public. And can it ping the head office, which is 10.0.10.2? Let's have a quick check. 10.0.10.2, and you can see that it can ping the head office public IP address. Okay, so what we're going to do is put in what's called a pinhole through the firewall. We're going to expose this web server to the internet but only for a specific port. And generally I would make this a non-standard port. So let's go to our head office domain controller, which is here, and I'm going to use this to remote and set up our port forwarding on our NBN router here. So I'm going to open up a browser, and it's going to go to 192.1. You can see it gets out to the internet, 68.0.1. That'll get into our NBN router head office. And the place that we need to go to for this, it's relatively easy, is you can just go to the router. Now we've worked on RIP, we've worked on NAT, now we're working on this thing called virtual server. And in here what we're going to do is we're going to expose our internal machine. So based on an input interface, which in our case is going to be Ether00, which is the one that plugs into, for the head office, it's the one that plugs into switch 1. Okay, so that's Ether00, plugs into switch 1. It's the one that goes out to the internet. Any address, I don't care where it comes from, using a TCP port, the local port number I'm going to pick is, say, 17,443, which is a HTTPS. It's going to be a HTTPS port. So I'm using a completely non-standard port here. I might make that 47. 43433. So normally we would go just port 443 for SSL-based connections, and the remote machine, well, the one that's internal, is this one here, 192.168.0.66, and the port number that it listens on for HTTPS is port 443. Now we can just go one-to-one like that, so we're exposing port 443. Now that's a standard port, and if I had like a port sniffer or something like that out there on the internet, one of the things I'd be looking for is the first 1,024 ports, which are fairly standard. And as soon as I found a port 443, I would know that I've got a web server behind that port. So the best thing to do is to not use a standard port externally. So what we're going to do is pick a completely non-standard port. So let's just go 54s. Okay, completely non-standard port. And what that means is I'm using a non-standard port, and not only am I port forwarding to the inside, I'm also doing a thing called port address translation, where I'm translating the port, the external port, to a different internal port. So I'm going to plus that rule onto the list. So from Ethernet 00, that means from the outside, any IP address using the TCP protocol, using a non-standard port of 44444, I think that was 54s, then push that traffic through to our web server using the standard HTTPS port of 443. And that's the rule. Okay, so I'm going to close that. And so on here, I'm going to open up my browser. Which we know goes out to the internet. Which we know gets out to the internet. We're going to open up a new tab, and I'm going to go to 10.0.2.2, which is the head office router. Now what will happen is it'll go at the moment, I've actually got it exposed for port 443 to web browse into. So it's refusing a contact there. If I put port 443 at the end of that, or the other way you can do that is HTTP S and do the same thing. Actually, what I'm doing is I'm looking at the wrong one. I'm looking at myself. So what I should be looking at is the 10 subnet. No wonder it wasn't doing anything. Okay. So that goes to the zero shell. Okay. So I can proceed and I can get into the zero shell from externally. Now normally I would lop that off and not allow that to happen, and you can do that in zero shell. But what we want is to hit this port 4s and have it go to our internal. So if I put a port number at the end of it, like that, you'll see that it doesn't go anywhere. Check the proxy in the firewall. Okay. Okay, so it didn't get there. Probably I may not have enabled HTTPS on the website. Let's have a quick look at the web server, which I think is that one. Yeah, that's it. Local. It's using HTTP, not HTTPS. Let's have a look at the tools and the web server. Okay, I think sites, default website, SSL settings. I haven't ticked the box that it requires SSL, so it's not using port 443. It's using standard HTTP. Okay, so that explains why using that port number I wasn't getting there. Using the port address translation rule on the virtual server of port 443, that should actually be port number 80 because it's just using standard HTTP. So what we're going to do is modify this rule and basically have to just get rid of it and put it back in again. Okay, so external interface, any IP address, TCP, local port number is going to be the 54s. That's the internal web server. We'll change it to port 80 and plus it in. Okay, so that means using an external non-standard port of 44444, it will translate that port number back to port number 80, which is what our web server is listening on, port 80, not port 443, because I hadn't turned on the SSL. And so in here, where it didn't find it before, now I've got it back to port 80. If I hit the refresh button, let's see if I can get it to go. HTTP 10.0.10.2 with a port number of 44444. And you can see I get to the internal web server that's on in the domain. And as you saw when I just opened up the browser on the web server itself, we've got a default of going to our internal DNS called web, and that just pulls up the HTTP, which is port number 80, and that pulls up the local website for Get Well Medical Practice. So, and you know, the the other machines in the domain will also get to this as well. So if I went to, not that one, if I went to this is the branch office, and I opened up the browser, it gets to the web server because we've put that as a default website, and it's using port number 80. But you know, we've also got our external person, Win10 public, who's also going there as well. So if I go 10.0.10.2 with the right port number, it gets through our firewall, using our firewall rule, to our web server. And let's just go back and have a quick look at our rule just to make sure. Looking the virtual server, what we've done is we've used a non-standard port, which is the 4s, and we've port address translated it back to port number 80, as we've port redirected from the external anywhere on the internet back into a local IP address, which is the web server. So we're directing anything that comes in on that port number, we're port address translating it back to port 80, and we're pushing it back to our web server. That's the end of this video. So what I would do is a screen capture of probably that, so you could see that our Win10 public is using a not secure, like a HTTPS, just standard HTTP, that address, and this is the rule, and that it's actually getting to our internal web server. So that I'd screen capture that. Okay, so that ends this video.